Welcome to Go the Distance, the podcast that brings you the top contractors, disruptors, and investors redefining home services. Stay ahead with cutting-edge insights on business strategy and technology built to fuel your growth. Hosted by entrepreneurs and investors Nick Durbano and Ethan Song, Go the Distance is where the future of the trades take shape. All right, welcome to episode 1 of Go the Distance. I'm Nick. I'm one of the co-founders of Distance. Since this is our first episode, I thought maybe we would do a little bit of an intro before we actually get into the topic du jour, which is, do Facebook ads still work? So, Ethan, if you don't mind, I'll go first, just because I think your intro is going to be better than mine. So, I'm Ethan and I have known each other for the better part of 15 years. My background is, in growing and scaling businesses, both on the sales side and on the marketing side. And now I am focused on building Distance with Ethan. So, Ethan, why don't you give folks a little bit of a rundown on you?
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll do the 30-second. I mean, I was born in China, immigrated to Canada. Now I'm based in the U.S., but I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. I actually grew up in the back of my mom's Chinese like handcraft and like arts supply store. So I've been involved in small business basically all my life. I actually studied in engineering, but then decided to go into the consumer and retail world, and I built a few companies in that space that grew to 8-digit, 9 digits, basically in terms of size. I'm also an investor in a dozen or so companies, both on the consumer and the technology side. Now, what drew me basically to the home services space is that I feel as though there's such an energy at the moment and excitement in terms of both the caliber of services that business owners want to deliver, but also the innovation that's happening in the space. And so what we're going to try to do here is actually bring all of our knowledge from all the other industries we've been involved and bring those learnings into the home services space.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously, why are we even here? Like, why a podcast? Like, there's a lot of podcasts, right? Why are we starting a podcast?
I think there's a lot of podcasts, that is true. But at the same time, like, I've listened to all the different podcasts, and I just feel as though within this space, the owners, the entrepreneurs, the technicians, they're on the road. And so if it feels right for them, it's easy to consume. Now, our intent is also to bring new guests that they may not have heard about. So people from the industry, but also from outside the industry, and effectively, honestly, just bring a different touch, a different voice to the space.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously we try to have some fun, bring some great guests in, and I think my goal with this, at least, is to make sure we're giving people some enjoyable content that they can actually learn from, right? And hopefully you take away some actionable nuggets that you can apply to your business. And we're gonna do we'll start off with like 30-minute little sessions. Is that the idea? A few times a week?
Yeah, exactly. It's like 1 to 3 times a week, dropping, during on weekdays. We're gonna keep them short because, once again, I love it when it's something you can like consume in one shot. As you drive from one location to the next location. A lot of easy, fast takeaways that you can apply direct to your business. We're gonna bring in some guests as well that can inspire you, but also bring you learnings from other industries. And we'll keep it moving. We're also gonna get a lot of feedback from our listeners and improve over time.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll get it started. So let's get into the first topic, which is an important one, which is Facebook ads in particular, or meta ads, I guess, if you want to be more precise. And the reason this is important is, I think a lot of people in the home service businesses, a lot of owners are spending money on ads. They're either doing it themselves or they're paying a lot of money for an agency to do it. And in our conversations with a lot of these folks, I don't think they have a good handle on average on the mechanics. And I think if you're going to spend money here, it could be an absolute game changer for your business, right? This is magic. And I know in the e-commerce space, you spend a lot of money on ads and it worked really well for you. Just to give people like a sense of, okay, these guys know what they're talking about. You want to kind of just give a high level of how much money was being spent, over the course of your, e-commerce career on Facebook ads in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to call Mark Zuckerberg to send me the tab, but I would say it's definitely in the millions.
Yeah,
Like I think with one of my business, the highest we spend was probably around three to $400,000 in a single month. Now there are people that are spending millions of dollars a month out there, so I can't say that I'm the biggest spender, but
right.
the second point is I think we've also seen the evolution, from like back in early 2010s to like where it is now. Where I definitely feel like there's been times when everyone was going all in on ads and times when people were saying that ads don't work at all. Where I think now we've gone to a point where it's a little bit more somewhere in the middle. It's not a silver bullet, but that said, it's still one of the best ways to target your audience and your customers, especially if you have a very specific audience that you want to target. But yeah, I mean, I would say like I've definitely been part of many different campaigns. I've also seen it work and not work for different businesses.
All right, so I'm gonna start with like the first hot take here, which I think most people suck at ads. Okay, I'm just gonna like throw that out there. I think most of the ads that you see are absolutely horrible, and they're not generating any value. And a lot of people are just spending money and throwing it away on on failed strategies because they haven't done the research, they haven't put the thought into it, or they're just doing what everyone else is doing, even if those things are not working. It's like everyone's like following the penguin jumping off the cliff. So let's actually start off with maybe, what is like the right formula? How should someone even think about this? If you're just getting started, or maybe you have an agency, like what would your feedback to owners be around how should I even approach this topic of ads? Is ads right for me? And if it is right for me, how should I think about it?
I mean, I think the first thing, even taking a step back from your question, is I think one of the reasons why ads haven't worked for a lot of people, or people will spend a bunch of money after a few months, they'll be like, hey, it's not working and shut it off, is because, I think a lot of people think of ads just like they would, think of like buying ads in the local newspaper or buying, like billboards and things like that, where I bought it, it is what it is, and that's it. I'm done. Whereas like I think with digital ads and specifically like, Facebook and Instagram, it's all about refinement. It's all about improvement. And so I think the first thing would be to think about it differently than just buying like a physical ad. Is that digital ads actually require you to look at the data, understand the results, and refine the results. And so you may not get basically the results you want right away, but see it as like a learning phase to get towards where you need to be. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you basically just outsource it fully to an agency and you don't really understand the metrics yourself, then you don't really know how to coach them or help them and guide them, and therefore you don't have that feedback loop. And if you don't have that feedback loop, then in most cases you won't succeed.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay, great. Well, let's say we're about to get started. You want to, you run a plumbing company. You want to put some ads. Um, what what is the first thing we should think about? Like, what's the formula um, for success here?
Yeah, look, I mean, like without going to the technical details, I really think there's kind of like only really two things for anyone to focus on. I think is one, the storytelling, the creatives themselves. I think that's something people tend to forget, which is ultimately the click through rate or the conversion rate, like how many people are going to click on it and go to your website and fill a form, is going to depend a lot on how much you attract their attention with the actual ads themselves. Whether it's video, like on an Instagram stories, or whether it's like more like a the classic square like on Facebook. I do think that creatives makes a huge difference, and that's been tested time and time again. And so as an example right now, like short form videos are having a moment. So you need to be aware of that. And the second thing is you need to create content that ultimately will differentiate your business from all the other like HVAC or plumbing companies or advertising in your space. And so from that perspective, it's like, what is your story? What makes your product or services unique? How do you tell that in a unique way through the visuals? After that, I would say you want to think about what is the strategy, right? Like what segment of the market do you want to target? Is it a specific demographic? Is it a specific geographical area? Is it a specific need? Do you maybe even want to like market against your competitors? And so I think segment would be the second piece to focus on. So the combination of creatives and segment, I think, is where you're going to find success. And once again, it's about testing. And so you could start with a thesis and then try other ones.
Yeah, and I think an important point here is like you need to put in the work, right? And you might have I don't know, you might have months where you're kind of flailing, but you got to commit to it. And if it's something that you believe is gonna work, you need to make sure you're putting in the energy and the reps because you're you're unlikely to hit the nail on the head on the first shot, even with an agency. And so, what are the metrics that people should be looking at to guide whether they're being successful or not? Like there's obviously there's CPM, there's CPC, there's cost per lead, there's cost per booking, and like when you actually log into Meta, or you get one of these reports from an agency, it could get pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. So like and I think there's a lot of signal with even just like one or two of those metrics. So I think we can maybe do a good job here of helping people see the more important KPIs on those dashboards. Cost per lead. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think my feeling for home services or local businesses is that like a cost per lead or a cost per booking, maybe just one step
Yeah,
further, I think would make sense. Sometimes you may have to do some manual work to actually calculate that out, but ultimately, like that means that someone has taken action on your website or has called your phone number and you had an opportunity to convert that customer, right? Like, so whatever happens after that is ultimately on your team and on your funnels, but at least like the ad did its job of bringing you that lead. So I would say cost per lead or cost per booking is a good way of thinking about it. um but that said, once again, like you might not be able to get to that number without committing at least like to test for 2 to 3 months. So like I wouldn't like
yeah,
over obsess about it right away. Your goal is to get some volume, get some visits, get some data, and then maybe like after 2 3 months revisit. So like that's the other thing with ads is that like you do want to start with like some level of commitment. Like if you're like, oh, I'm just gonna spend like $50 to try it, it probably won't work, right? So you
yeah.
need
It's
to
not
have
gonna work at all. Yeah,
some kind of budget that you're willing to commit, an effort you're willing to commit over time. And I don't know if you want to talk about like how to work with agencies, but I think the reality is for most home services businesses, and you're not going to do it yourself. Whether you hire a contractor, whether you hire like your cousin who seemed to know about digital marketing, or like someone on like Fiverr or one of those like like marketplaces, or an actual agency in your local geography, you're most likely going to work with someone. And I think knowing how to work with them will also help you to succeed.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the other point about that is an agency like on average will usually cost what like $1,000 or $2,000 a month minimum. Most agencies will cover that as a retainer, and then they'll probably charge you a percentage of what they bring in. There'll probably be some commission structure, so or based on the percentage of what you're spending on ads. So some version of that they end up going into like a variable model. So those are typically what we end up seeing. Um, but if we take a step back for a second, because I think the another important piece to consider here is like in e-commerce, people live and die by this strategy, and I think the way that they think about it, I think is quite important, right? Which is like return on ad spend. I think it's probably helpful to maybe spend 2 minutes just explaining like what is ROAS, what is return on ad spend, and why it's relevant, even if you're hiring an agency, to make sure that you're getting a good return on your investment from this stuff, right? So, like, what is ROAS?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately is like if you put $1 into this initiative, how many dollars you get back, right? So I would say, and like you got to think about like you also have costs and margins and things like that. So typically, like you want it to be above 3, if not in that 4 to 5 range. I would say the higher the better. But there is a point where if your ROAS, return on ad spend, is 1 to 1, you're probably losing money because you also have the
Yeah,
cost of your technicians, your trucks, and things like that, right? The cost of servicing your customer, and so I think you can figure out like the minimum ROAS to make this profitable by looking at your margins and compare it to your ad spend. But typically, I would say like, if you spend $1,000 that month, you want to get at least $5,000 worth of contracts, right? So,
and
and
just
and
to
I
be
would say
clear,
honestly, for
yeah, I was
yeah,
going
go
to say,
ahead.
just to be clear, when you say spend $1,000, it's like you spend $1,000 on an ad on Facebook, but you're still spending like 2 grand on the agency. So you're actually spending 3 grand, right? Like that should go in the calculation for what the quote unquote spend is.
Yeah, like I would say the agency cost should go into it, and if you end up like having to bring on like graphic designers or like if you're making videos, like basically all the cost that goes into
Yeah.
doing this thing should be built in into that cost. And so that's why like it's not necessarily like it's hard to start with just a few $100s. And that's why
Yeah.
I don't necessarily recommend someone who has like only like a couple gigs a week, who's like a single contractor, to start putting ads. But the moment that you have a bunch of technicians and you're looking to scale past like $2 3 million, I think that it starts making sense at that point.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think that that's a good point. And okay, cool. So let's maybe jump into maybe more of the creative piece, which is like, all right, how do you actually create ads that actually convert and drive bookings? Like, what are some tactics, strategies that are that work well? Like, if you're going to start with something, or you're going to suggest to your agency, hey, maybe we should start with this. Like, what are some things that that tend to work well?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like having studied it and looked at it, like for local businesses, like because your geography is not huge, right? It's like your segmentation is pretty limited. Okay, like the only thing I think that's interesting for me to consider from a pure segmentation perspective is like marketing and remarketing, like for people that
Mm,
went to your site. But if you take that strategy apart, and the reason why I'm talking about segmentation, even though you asked me about creatives, is that I think 95% of it is in the creative. Okay, and so like because there's very few tweakings, and creatives ultimately actually comes from you, and so that's why even when you hire an agency, really what you're saying is the agency will do the 5 to 10%, and you're still doing 90%, which is figuring out what makes you unique, and then how to convey that idea in a unique way. So where I would start is very simple: look inward. What makes us unique? And like it could be the silliest thing, right? Like it's just what makes us different, and it's like, hey, what makes us different could be, we just bought this business, and this business has been around since like the last 40 years. And so the history of this business is what makes it unique. The other thing could be that we have a really funny name. And like the fact that like our name is funny and our logo is funny, that's what makes us unique. It could also be that like, hey, we're prominent in this community and we've donated and contributed in supporting sports leagues or like, like cultural communities in this neighborhood, and we're part of that community. That is what makes us unique. So whatever makes you unique, I think you should put up front. Now, one recommendation I have for local businesses, I think having one of the owners or one of the principals in the company kind of be the spokesperson, like the classic, like almost like car salesman perspective, which like you're the front and you're on the ads. I think it's great. I think it's great because like no one can be you, right? So if your unique personality will shine through, and to having you actually being featured in the ads, and then when a
mm,
job needs to be done and you actually show up, that's like also another way to differentiate.
yeah, yeah. No, those are good points. And one thing that is I think really important, because a lot I've actually tested this out by going on Facebook, clicking on ads, going to someone's site, like filling out a form, or maybe they have like a direct message thing pop up in Facebook, whatever, and I'm like, oh, I'm interested in your service. I just did a test. I went out and I pinged like 10 or 15 home service businesses, and I think most of them, like 80% of them, got back to me like 2 days later. And I was kind of shocked. Like, here you are, you're spending all this money to attract someone, and then when they show up, you ignore them for 48 hours and then get back to them. And I read this stat that if you're answering a message within the first, I think it's like a 30 seconds or a minute, it's some really short window, the likelihood of you actually closing that deal jumps up 4x. If you wait even 5 minutes, the likelihood of you closing that deal drops like 8x. So, that's just one example of, okay,
Yeah.
once you figure this out and you actually do it, and you're actually starting to generate some leads, how do you actually take advantage of that? Because I think that's like an area that's not really talked about, which is what happens once they click and they're interested. How do you actually bring that deal to closure? Um, and I don't think enough people are thinking about that motion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like booking and conversion motion is critical because if you think about your return on ad spend, well, that return will be impacted significantly by that conversion metric, and so I think it's super important. I tend to agree with you. I think that what's interesting is some of the best like HVAC or roofing or plumbing companies are actually investing a lot in training for their CSRs or for their like sales technicians, their field sales people, because they're doing that closing. But I tend to agree with you that they're not putting as much attention on their website, on like the performance of their form, on even the loading speed of their website, all those small factors that can like significantly impact the conversion rate, and then when someone actually does fill that form, how fast do they get a message back? That
Yeah.
whole process, I think, is not great. I think that like a lot of the processes in the industry are still built around optimizing from when someone calls you, like someone looks at the event and calls you. But I think that the reality is that everything's shifting digital. So as you decide to put more efforts into your social media, as you decide to put like some dollars into ads, you got to think about your digital presence and how to boost conversion both digitally and through your call center.
Okay, so like let me give you like a thought exercise here. You're gonna start or you're gonna acquire. You're not gonna start. You're gonna go. You got some cash. You're gonna go buy an HVAC company, and they're doing a little bit of ads. Nothing yet. Can you walk through like today? They're doing about $1 million in revenue. Let's say they're not doing any ads actually. Okay, and their branding is kind of weak. Like, could you give us like the 2 minute spiel of what you would do? Kind of take these learnings, like how would you'd approach it on day one? You'd walk in there, what would you actually do?
Well, actually, it's funny you say that because I would love to buy an HVAC business. So if anyone listening to this has one, and maybe you're a little bit tired, maybe you want to go on vacation, maybe you want to go to Mexico, whatever you want to do, call me. Maybe we can make this work, and then
That's
I
it.
can actually, document it and see what
Yeah,
happens.
that wouldn't
Um,
be a bad idea. Build in public.
I would say like I mean I think there's a few things you can do. The first thing I would do actually is like look at the CRM. And so like look at like the all the people that book services in the past, look at all the people that have inquired about services but were never booked. And I would like get myself or my team on the phone and call all of them. So I would basically try to, I guess the term could say juice the CRM, but effectively re-energize the CRM and re-engage our customers. Why? Because like the easiest thing to generate more business is to engage the customers you already have, right? So I think that that's something I would do immediately. That would be step one. Why? Well, what you want to do when you first come into business is like having some quick wins and some easy wins. I feel like that would drive easy wins. You would automatically increase your revenue by 10, 20, 30%. It all depends on how nicely structured the CRM is,
Yeah, yeah.
and how much opportunities there are. So I would say that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is, yes, I would probably revamp the website and all the digital marketing, both from a look and feel, refresh that, as well as making sure that like everything is well set up, to maximize conversion, because ultimately every other effort that you put out there will basically impact that. And the third piece I would do is I would actually take the entire team through a new training program. One, to kind of anchor the right culture for the business, and two, basically to make sure that we have like consistent processes. So I think those are the three first steps I would take on. I know you wanted me to like say I would go spend $1 million on Facebook,
No, no,
but
no, no.
those are the
You
three
already.
things I would do. And like now that you've heard it, you realize that like it wouldn't cost a lot actually, right? So like
Yeah,
the
right.
goal is not to start spending. The goal is to establish the right foundation or refresh the foundation to grow your business further later.
How much energy would you actually put into brand? Because we talked about brand being important in Facebook ads. Now we kind of just touched on it briefly, refresh the website, etc. Like my view is a lot of these businesses that we see, the ones that really focus on differentiating themselves with a unique voice or a unique point of view, um, really stand out. There are a lot of
Yeah,
pest control businesses. There are a lot of like plumbing businesses. I think there was one in Edmonton. It's like Men in Skirts, and they're just like they're window washers, but they wear kilts. Like it's like a very small thing. But out of all the window washers, you're going to remember the men in kilts pulling up to your house and
yeah.
washing your window. Yeah, a bit of a gimmick, right? But I think there's something to that in a sea of sameness to stand out. And it's like how important is that for you?
I mean, I think differentiation is everything, because like the service that you offer may not be that differentiated, right? Like
Mhm.
anyone, like if you have a sink that needs to be fixed, like any plumbing company can do that. Even like, HVAC companies that have like specific relationships with manufacturers, ultimately you can have access to that. So I think that like differentiation is everything. Now, the beauty in this space, okay, is that like your differentiation is really only related to anyone else who can service this home. And so it's not all of the HVAC companies in North America. It's the five, six, seven. maybe 10 max in your local geography. And in some smaller cities, it'll be two. And
Yeah.
so what I would first start is literally like look at all their websites, maybe put them on like a single sheet, print them out, or like do it digitally and look at what they look like and basically ask yourself, like, how do I differentiate in my current context? And the reality is that often you'll see, well, there'll be one that's differentiated basically because they're big. And there'll be another one that's differentiated because they've been around for like 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And maybe you don't have that luxury. And so, like, from there, then, yeah, like find something, whatever that thing is, find something to differentiate and use that as your jumping off point. And I would do all of that before you start spending money because, like,
Yeah.
otherwise, like, it won't be spent efficiently.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Awesome. Well, I know we have a few more minutes left. Is there anything else that you wanted to dig your teeth into on Facebook?
Yeah. The last point I would say is that I definitely think that, like, having the owners and the founders create content also on their own
Mm,
channels. Now, whether that's like on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, is extremely powerful. Obviously, everyone is, talking and loving like the content that Tommy Mello at A1 Garage is doing, and he's kind of become a bit of an icon, for the industry. But the reality is, you can do that at a small scale for your audience, because once
yeah,
again, like, you don't need to be a national brand. You don't need to be nationally recognized. What you need to be is you need to be recognized in your local neighborhood and the community that you serve. And so I think, like, starting with you actually creating organic content, once again, whatever you're into, like, it could be literally like you're like the biggest fan of your local sports team, or you love, like, like minor leagues, whatever that is, start talking about that, start talking about your business, put that content out there. I think that if you do that and then layer ads on top of that, it will just be so much more powerful.
yeah. I agree. Like someone said, like the best differentiation is you being you. Like no one. No, was it you
No
that
one
said
can be
that?
you.
Yeah, I think I'm
I
like
mean,
quoting you.
I say it, but I didn't come up with it. I say it, but I
Yeah, I
didn't
think I've
come up
heard.
with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm attributing it to you. But I think that's a really good feedback. Like even if you're not funny, you're camera shy, whatever. Like even if you're awkward, like that awkwardness is unique, right? Like I think whatever
Yeah.
it is, like you just being authentic is. If
Well,
you
I'll
don't
tell you
have
where I
any
actually.
idea how to, yeah, go.
Well, I was just gonna say I'll tell you where it comes from, then and maybe give like a last nugget before we close off
Sure.
today. So it actually comes from Naval Ravikant, who who is a
Mm,
philosopher. That's probably not known in the home service space, but in the software and like investment space. And what he was saying is that, like, if you start drawing circles around your unique experience, your unique, like, life experience and competencies, if you draw enough circles around them, there's a high chance that the crossing of those will be something no one else has.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And
Like
like, you don't need to pretend that you're someone who you're not and try to copy whoever you think is successful in your local area. You should actually do the opposite, is embrace who you are and your own personal path of how you got to where you are, and make that your main selling point.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. That's really good. And not many people are doing it, which is the opportunity.
And
All
and
right.
and now you know why you're going to listen to this podcast, because this is the only podcast where Tommy Mello and Naval Ravikant are mentioned in the same 5 minutes.
That's true. That's true. Awesome. All right. Well, this is a good first one. And we'll get another one on the book soon.
All right, we'll see you guys soon.
All right. Ciao.